It's 3 minutes past, so let's get started. And welcome everybody to the February 17th SIG Multicluster call. And let me just enable screen sharing for everybody. And so today we have Arthur first on the list of topics.
Hello. Okay, let me share my screen. It should work. Okay. So this is MCS API related. Well, I wasn't talking about that for a couple of weeks now, but it's related to a new API to basically select clusters. And we had some meetings before to check what we even want to do. But yeah, I put the main point here. So we are selecting clusters based on cluster property and about API things. For now, we don't want to prescribe any things that any means to get those info from other clusters in implementations. It's user control on the service export and then somehow get on the service import in your implementation, like most other fields. And basically, we want arbitrary cluster properties keys selected in the cluster selectors, and also arbitrary values, and also importantly to be able to select the same value as your current cluster. That if you have a cluster with no endpoints being ready, it should be skipped in the selection, and that for now we don't bother ourselves with traffic distribution in the cluster selection, but we might revisit this at some point later. So, oh yeah, and I made a note here, but that would be more for implementation. Okay, so the API that I'm proposing today looks like this. I kind of had two inspiration, which is like the network policy aspect. So in network policy, you have something called the label selector in the Kubernetes object, and it's those things match labels and match expressions. So we might be able to just literally put that struct and be able to do that. The problem is we want to select the same value as the consumer. So I put same as consumer. It looks ugly. If anyone has better proposal, yeah, I would be grateful for that. And I have possibly another proposal around that to fix this issue, which is to add another operator. I put the same thing, same as consumer, but could be something else if you have better ideas again. And there is also the cell kind of things. And here is an expression that does stuff. Like here, just limit ourselves to the local cluster. Here, select some arbitrary properties. And here, some more advanced stuff like what I did again. Yeah, get the same region and also the same foobar that we had previously. In those cases, it would probably make sense to invert the order of those, but yeah, like being more restrictive first and then going to the old foobar without the region. I guess I would just do that actually. But yeah, it would still be valid anyway. Okay, well, voila from my initial proposal. Feel free to critique those, fuel your ideas and anything you want. Yeah, that's about it. If you have any question, comments. Yes, Mike.
Can one of the option be consuming the placement decision? So instead of, I mean, not instead of, in addition to cluster selectors and the cell
Mm-hmm.
selection, maybe it's like a placement decision selection. I'm not sure if that's the right view, but basically you wouldn't define the scheduling spec. Instead, you just say, "Hey, I know something that produces placement decision, and I'm gonna consume that that resource that results of that decision."
Uh, maybe, but I'm not that aware of placement decision. So if you could explain a tiny bit more, it would be nice for me, I think.
Yes. So the goal of the placement decision API is to have a common scheduling / placement outputs. So consumers, maybe in this case, can all consume that one output, which is the placement decision API. So rather than having each API kind of define their scheduling aspects, scheduling specs, some external orchestration tool or scheduling tool is doing that, but it produces the output placement decision,
Mm-hmm.
and then the consumer, such as Argo CD, such as Q, just consumes that placement decision output, and it knows, oh, these are the clusters that I need to do work on.
Okay. And how would you put that here? Because we are not
Well,
scheduling things here. So
yeah, I I'm thinking that maybe instead of, I mean, not instead, in additional to the selectors here, it'll be like a
yeah.
placement decision selector as well. And then that just looks up all the placement decisions and then gather the list of clusters.
Is there a world where a placement decision harness the writes to the service export in either option 1, option 2, or cell style format, whatever we go with?
I'm just not sure I'm understanding this right, because it gives you the cluster where the pod are scheduled, but you want to restrict that list because we already have that list in the status on the size import.
I think Mike may be saying that the placement decision API could be a place that you write not only where pods are scheduled, but things like decisions similar to the decision that's being made here, the decision of which clusters this should be preferred for the
Ah,
MCS traffic. Yeah, so I think right now we've always talked about
okay.
placement decision about being in terms of placing workloads, but I think what Mike might be saying is that API could also hold this type of decision making. And if so, then is there a way we can make what you've proposed here flexible to that in some way? Is that true, Mike? Am I
No, I
representing?
mean, you word it way better than me. Yeah.
Okay, well, just more
Okay, yeah.
times we think through it, the more we get it. Okay, so yeah, I think that's what it is about.
Yeah, I think it could make sense. Uh, we need to. I think it kind of opens up also the things about intelligent routing. You want to say, I just want to route traffic to clusters in 10 milliseconds away or things like that. Maybe it could be nice. It's kind of a external cluster selector, but in the SIG multi-cluster ecosystem, I guess which sounds nice. Yeah, that would be my take on this. I just don't know if it should really be in the first thing. Because,
Yes.
yeah. But yeah, I would totally get that. Do you feel all similarly that this could be dealt in like a second version, or maybe like, I don't know, maybe alpha, it could be something static, and beta maybe add the external things with placement decision. And I guess we also need to modify the placement decision API, so it's not exactly small.
Yep, I agree.
And I do
Cool.
think with what you've got here, sorry to keep, but I feel like if we added that in, it would definitely be like additive, like another field or something, like just looking at this more closely. Option 1 and option 2 is so like label focused.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. Yes.
Yeah, so either it would be like because so I think either it would be that some other thing can integrate in the like make the connector between the placement API and any labels it applies to like workloads or whatever, or clusters or something, and filling that in here, or that there's like a totally different kind of thing that's like a policy shorthand that's like redirect to placement API's thoughts that isn't tied to the idea of the label structure.
Yeah, yeah.
So
It
yeah.
definitely sounds very cool. Like, yes. Oh, and by the way, the network policy style and the cell style, it could technically be put together, as I wrote here, because like
Yeah,
it's
I wanted
expression
to,
and
yeah,
yeah.
I wanted to say I like cell style, but I am a freak maybe. Like I like that it can like it's integrated more directly with like the about API in concept, and then I like that it's more composable. And I guess also like because I've been working a lot on um, like other projects that are using Cell, it feels like that's like a direction a lot of stuff is trying to go, but that could be bias just from exposure. So, but yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Like for me, I have like two grudge with cell. It's kind of much verbose than like label selector.
Right.
And
Yeah.
second, network policy didn't integrate it yet, as far as I
Right.
know, even in their new cluster network policy thing. So we could do that, but we will be ahead of the curve.
Right.
Yeah. So, sorry to steal your place, Mike, in the queue, but the regarding cell, I can't remember who said at the last KubeCon that in many contexts, cell is useful if you don't actually know exactly what you want, and so you can put cell in and let people do whatever they want, and then you look at what people are actually doing, and you replace it with something more static that does the stuff that people actually need, because cell tends to be quite expensive in quite a lot of contexts. So maybe it's appropriate here, though. I quite like it because it does you can add features without changing the API definition as well. But yeah, Mike, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say I quite like Cell as well. But I thought this proposal does include Cell, but also like as an option, right? So you have to
Mhm.
is it kind of like, oh, label selector is one of the option and then Cell is another option, that type of thing?
I mean, at this stage, we don't know.
Okay.
I laid out some options, and then we are
Maybe.
discussing what to do.
Yeah. It seems more likely that we could get the cell variant working more easily compared to getting a new operator added to Well, I guess we can. It wouldn't be modifying the core label selector. We'd have our own cluster
Yeah.
selector. Yeah.
Yeah.
True, true.
But yeah, both would be
Yeah.
nice, and they avoid having the hard-coded special value for the label matching in the first option.
Yeah, but maybe we can find a way that is more elegant there, but I don't know which one. Oh, and actually, I think this enables slightly more things. Yeah, because you can do this. This you cannot do with the operator. Like the in with one same cluster and another cluster.
Yeah, yeah. So you could do it in cell, but not in
Yes.
not in a match expression. Right.
In cell though, I heard. Well, I'm not aware of like network policy going to cell, but I'm aware of Cilium discussion that say they might want to go to cell, and I heard some dev there. I don't remember his name and the context. Sorry, it's like yeah. Well, there was something around fields length and that you cannot like cram everything into cell. So I'm not entirely sure if this is actually possible or not, but maybe some of you are more aware. I don't know.
Yeah, it rings a bell, but can't remember the specifics.
Well, technically, like I always say that we should somehow consult SIG network at some point. So if we present that and they say not going to happen because X and
Yeah.
X
Yeah.
is probably I don't
Yeah.
know, this is too much. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think we generally have been trying to stay synced where we can.
Okay. So like as like semi-conclusion to this, I think you liked all the options and we don't know yet option 1 and 2. But yeah. Oh, Brian.
Yeah, probably I missed something. Just for my own sake, what does same as customer mean?
It's like when the same value as the cluster you are in.
So it's so that you can write a service export that says go to the local cluster first if you can, but without you're exporting it from a single cluster, but you want all the service imports to have the value that matches their own cluster, and you don't. So obviously you can't hard code that ahead of time, so you need a placeholder for it. That's what that is.
Same as means if say the export is in region A, and I want the importer to try to go to, and the importer and the fleet has a class region A and a region B. Does that mean try to get or the import only goes to region A?
No, it's so that you can say that you're exporting from region A, but when you write the service export, you want it to stay in the same. You want the importing cluster to stay in the same region if it can. So the service import for a cluster in region B would say region B, and maybe then fall back to region A. So I guess that's also part of the discussion at the end of every code block there. Correct me if I'm wrong, Arthur.
I'm not
But
100, still not 100%.
Well, imagine you have a fleet of clusters across two regions,
Yeah.
region A, region B, and you have a service that's available in only region B currently, and you
Yeah.
export it from region B, but you write it. So there's given that it's only available in a single place, there's not much point in writing any topology information. But for because you plan on deploying it elsewhere, you plan ahead, and so you say that the cluster selectors should match the same region as the consumer. So as long as but with a fallback. So as long as the service is only available in region B, importing clusters connect to the service in region B, even if they're in region A. But then when the service is deployed in region A, they all switch to all the clusters in region A will favor the service that's in region A without having to change the service export because it was already set up that way.
Oh,
Yeah, and maybe more simply, you could just also prefer the local cluster for, like, you have 10 cluster, you
Yeah.
just want to prefer local cluster. And here you would just have to replace that by, I don't remember the name of the cluster property for the cluster name, but yes.
oh.
Yeah.
So this is like kind of like a templating stuff that it's a part of this API. It's just special for this API. It's not a generic one.
Yeah. Well, we could so going down the cell path, we could make it generic because there you just have a map of the cluster properties.
I mean, it's all generic, but we just need to find some special character to say, hey, you need to replace that by
Yeah, I need
the
to.
same thing as the ground cluster.
Okay, thank you.
And apart from like placement decision, which is a really cool idea, do you have any other crazy idea or reasonable actually? We could also do this later on. When if you have more ideas later on, we could reach out in Slack or something like that.
Yeah, can we marinate for a while?
Yeah. Sure.
But yeah, thanks for the follow-up. This looks great, and it's really helpful to see it written out, the options.
Maybe I can even like write the cap now that, because I think you are mostly okay with that. We just don't know which option we choose here, but it sounds okay. So I could write the cap and argue on the cap directly, I guess, and even present that to SIG Network. Not like next week, but I don't know, in 2-3 weeks, a month, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds like a sensible way forward.
Yeah, and I think definitely like articulate well why we're focusing on service export, because I had to like go back into the last tab to remind myself why that was happening and not reopen that can of worms. And then, yeah, I think we had a lot of discussion about like the awareness of endpoint conditions and how smart that could be. So I think that will need a lot of rationale to head off some questions, because I think those are two things in which I feel we made very opinionated choices.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will try my best.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. And we can obviously work on it together over some time, but that's just my first thoughts of the proposal part at the top, which I think is also partially what you're confirming we're all on the same page about, so that when you write the cap, we're more or less aligned on the bullet points.
So which one was the other one again?
And that it's on the service export in here.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, sounds great. So that's all from me. If one else has any other thing.
Yep, there's a few other topics. So Mike's got the next one, cluster inventory API release.
Yes, kind of a continuation of the topic that we discussed last week. Now that we have a few consumers of the cluster inventory APIs, specifically the cluster profile API, and also we're pushing for Argo CD to adopt the cluster profile API. One of the main question that they have is how come there's no official release yet on the repo? And the release that I'm talking about is mainly focusing on just the API, the CRD. I'm not talking about the other question, which is regarding the plugins and the binaries that somehow we might need to create and host somewhere. So specifically, I'm only want to focus on just releasing the API. And I looked at the MCS API and how it released the initial version, the V 0.1.0 V1 Alpha 1. So it's good that Jeremy joined because he was the first one that did that release on the MCS API side. I just want to know what is the right way of doing this. Do we cut a release tag? I mean, do we cut a release branch? Do we tag it? Do we formalize something? Do we define some GitHub actions to assist in the future releases? How do we go about having the right process? And then, now that we're comfortable with doing the release, and then create the release. So just something that I want to bring up for discussion. So anyone have any comments, feedback?
I don't think we ever did this properly. For Laura, you raise your hand and you might have a different opinion. And I think we ever had a proper formal process. I think like cut and tag was sort of the path.
Yeah, I think like directly to your question, I think yes, we need a like release tag, and like we need a GitHub release. I think are two things that at least I want from the doc about the towards SIG multi-cluster release machinery, which I know you saw before. I think the mechanics of whether that's manual or automated is like if you wanted to cut one right now, you could just do those two things. And I think that would be okay. So that might unblock you immediately. I do think if in the process you come up with like a GitHub action or whatever, write some README docs or something about the best way, I'm happy to then like basically copy that across all the other repos that we're working on, and otherwise find some way to maybe get that in our collective consciousness, tribal knowledge, or some sort of if this then that for future projects and that get opened in the SIG. So I think that's like the most immediate answers, in my opinion, to your questions. And then I am really interested in the release of the plugins, compiled plugins, but I know that that's not your focus. So, but maybe we can touch up on that soon as well. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, so yeah, my thoughts are fairly similar. For a basic release, where so I don't think we need to cut a branch because you can always do that later if we realize it's necessary. So you just need to create a GitHub release, which also creates the tag, which is used by GoGet. And then the hard part there is deciding on the version number and then writing the release notes. And you need to do that manually anyway. So I don't think there's any advantage to having figuring out a GitHub action or a workflow beyond just going to GitHub and using the draft release and then publish. thing. We'll need something a bit more sophisticated than that later on, both because we want to release the plugins as container images. For MCS API, we'll want container images as well. And then there was John's question from last week about what we do, whether we want to automate change logs at all. And I haven't really thought about that since last week. And then, of course, so if you want to cut a release, feel free. I would just say, though, it's probably, given the recent changes in cluster inventory API, and in particular the bump to client Go 0.35, it's probably best to wait for the 0.35.2 point release, which is scheduled for the 10th of March, I think, because that will undeprecate some client Go stuff, which causes pain for consumers currently. So 0.35.0 and 0.35.1, they're not great from that perspective. Yeah, so Laura's adding a bunch of notes. So feel free to do that whenever. And then it sort of segues nicely into the next topic of the discussion, unless you have any more questions, Mike.
No, that's great. That's exactly what I needed. Thank you all.
Which is the cluster inventory API release process with container images. And so there's a pull request. Maybe I'll share my screen. Right, so that we discussed in the APAC call last week, which does a bunch of stuff. In particular, so it uses something called ko.build, which is a CNCF project, to actually build the plugins. It extends the E2E tests to check that the plugin that's being published actually works, or rather the image that is being published actually works. Yeah, so I haven't reviewed it completely yet, but I'd be interested in having other people's opinions on it, especially people who've been involved in release processes like this. So it's something I've done on other projects as well. So there's that, and it still doesn't address the automated changelog side of things, but it does have a few interesting properties. In particular, the version of the plugins doesn't have to be the same as the version of the project. So you publish a tag. So it's exactly what Mike was just asking for. Cluster inventory API, you cut a release, so you choose a version and you publish a tag, and that's what GoGet cares about. But you might not have any plugin changes, so there might not be any point in releasing a new version of the plugins at that point. And conversely, you might want to be able to release that plugin without having to release the API as a whole. But I'm not sure whether this process actually allows for that. But anyway, each plugin has its own separate version, which determines the tag that's used for the container images. And I think that's good. The process can be run manually or by pushing a API version tag, and the workflow goes and checks whether the image for the tag it wants to build already exists, and if so, it doesn't do anything. So we don't overwrite images with an already published tag, and we don't do any unnecessary work if we're just if the plugin hasn't changed. So I think that's pretty interesting. I haven't looked in detail at what ko build does, so that's something else to look at. And the other nice thing, I think I mentioned this last week, this answers a question that we had for the more general SIG multicluster release process, which is that there is a Kubernetes SIGs repo under which we can create our own image structure. So any comments about that? Yeah, Mike?
So going back to, yeah, wouldn't this kind of conflict with the API release as well? Like the way I understand it, the GitHub action will actually perform a release, right? And then, or doesn't, I,
No, they're tied together, but they're separate.
okay.
When you publish a release using the GitHub interface, it results in pushing a version tag like that. And so that would then run the workflow. But if nothing had changed in the plugin versions, nothing would be done. And it doesn't do anything with the API itself. So I think that would be okay.
So I'm still a little bit confused. So in the dumb way of asking is on the GitHub page, on the repo page, there's that release tab on the right. So if we
Yeah,
do this plugin release, it doesn't impact that, that particular tab, right? Or does it?
that's right. It adds to it, let's say. So you
Yes.
can have with this in place, if you went to the GitHub release page and published a release, it would run this workflow automatically. So the API itself would only be released by the fact of publishing a release using the GitHub API and creating a tag, and because that's the only thing that Go Get cares about, which is what you care about for consuming the API. But then publishing the tag would also run this workflow. And so if there were changes to the plugin version since the last time the workflow was run, it would publish the new images. So that does raise a question, however, of where we put the change information for the plugins, because if we can have new plugin versions that are published just by running the workflow, that doesn't give anywhere decent to publish the changes. And so it would, yeah, go ahead.
No, you finish. Sorry.
All right. And it would mean, so it would probably mean that what you want to do is when you're preparing a release of the API itself, you have a look at what's changed in the plugins, and if necessary, increment the plugin version and add the changes to the release notes. So the release notes would cover changes both in the APIs and in the plugins, which might end up being confusing. But then again, maybe not. Or we could, I need to think about this more, but we could have something where, so there are projects that host multiple projects in the same GitHub project in the same repo, and they publish. Well, and Go modules, for example, supports that. You can have a tag with submodule name and a version, and Go Get will handle that. And so then what people do is they have releases for the main module, releases for submodules or sub projects that are all separate, and they all appear together in the list of GitHub releases. But there's you say in the project's README what the nomenclature is for all that, so that people can distinguish. That works reasonably well, I think, but it is something that we need to raise in this discussion. So yeah. Thanks for asking.
I have a question. Does
Yeah.
I assume that anytime that the API updates, we also need to bump a plugin because the API is like compiled in with the plugin code, right?
Yes, that's a good point as well. So right, and that complicates things because you'd want when you tag the API, you'd want to simultaneously
Right.
bump the
Change the
dependency
plugin
inside the
version.
plugins. Well, bump the dependency in the plugins, change the plugin version so that everything gets published with the same tag.
Right.
Yeah, that's another. Yes, that's an important point.
And then, yeah, I mean, I think we can't avoid the plugin like semantic versioning getting off track with the API semantic versioning because the plugin could change on
Yeah,
independently. So I think we just have to accept that.
yeah, yeah. But we might need so we might ultimately need a Go submodule, sorry, style tagging scheme for the plugins.
So going back to what Laura and Jeremy suggested, isn't this whatever is defined here in this PR, the workflow? Isn't it this kind of the automation or the common thing that we're looking for? Because it essentially does the release, as you mentioned, the API and the binaries.
Yeah,
So
it's part of it. But with this, but
okay,
with the dependency that Laura just raised, we wouldn't be able to use the GitHub release UI if we wanted, at least if we wanted the tags to remain consistent.
okay.
Ryan?
Just to clarify or see if I understand correctly, the tags here, is that API version or it's the plugin version?
It's
The
the
0.
plugin version. It's the container image version.
Right. So it's not really releasing API. These two
Right.
are different, right?
Yeah. So you can so it's
Just to
point 3 here. You can build the images by running the workflow manually, or have it automated, and so that whenever you publish an API release, and this is the current proposal, right? And I think we need to revisit that. The idea here is you push an API tag and it would run the image build as well. But I think
just
because of the desire to make sure that the plugins use the latest cluster inventory API version, we need something a little more sophisticated than that.
yeah, that's why question. The plugin may not have to tie it up to a specific version because the plugin itself can release its own different functionalities, but without API changing, or even
Yeah,
with the API changing, plugin doesn't depends on the change. It may not matter to the plugin, so it seems to be relatively orthogonal versions. It may not be tied up. Just to clarify, yeah, okay, just for my own sake.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I
It's just
think
that from yeah. Go ahead, Laura.
just connecting back to Mike's question before of like, does this cover all of the automation? I think that step 3 about like what the quote unquote release workflow is, the details of how that is, like how that builds a GitHub release for the API or how that does or doesn't build a GitHub release and a tag for the plugins itself, I think is not covered in this. It may be that that is manual forever. It may be that we take some stuff like the automated changelog and automate that part, but still have a human press the GitHub release button that triggers this whole thing. But I think that's like the little, icing on the cake part that's still not covered by this, though this does potentially cover the majority of the build the image and make it public part.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also true, I think, that we might not want to automate absolutely everything, because if we keep some flexibility, well, I mean, it's better to have something where there's some manual intervention, at least as long as it's well documented. So it leaves more options open. Whereas if you have something that's fully automated, if you ever need a release in a scenario that hasn't been automated, you might end up a bit stuck. But yeah, so anyway, the conclusion for me on this one, at least, is that we need to discuss things a little bit more because of the the interactions. So I'll write up a comment on this PR. Any further comments, or can I move on to the next topic?
Go for it.
All right, and the next topic is another PR from the same submitter. Let me just there. And so the topic isn't the PR itself, but the questions that it raises. So this adds a new credential provider that's AWS specific. And so it raises the question of what do we want to do? Well, whether we want to host cloud provider specific auth plugins in the cluster inventory API repo and essentially take on the maintenance burden for those, and also deal with questions like, well, it might appear that we are favoring some cloud providers compared to others. Or do we say that cloud providers, if they want, should provide their own plugins and maybe then have a conformance test suite? Mike.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing this up, Stefan. There's also another PR that I think adds kind of Azure specific plugin. So it's kind of similar to this PR as well, and both questions sort of apply. And the reason I didn't put, I think in the EKS one, I put in a review comment of, hey, this is kind of vendor specific, but I didn't put that in the Azure one because I look at the contributor. I don't know if this is fair or not. When I look at a contributor from the Azure one, the contributor came from, the Azure project, the maintainers, or at least in the same companies that they're working for, versus the EKS AWS one, the contributor is not from AWS or EKS. So that's why that's also, this also brings into the discussion as well, right? Like who is allowed, I assume once they contribute this part, owns that part of the plugin. And I would be much more comfortable with the Azure maintainers maintain the Azure plugin, and the EKS maintainer maintains the EKS plugin. And so that's a little bit of that complexity as well, just to add a little bit to the context.
Yeah. And there's another one too, which is how do we ensure that we're able to test these properly?
Right.
So any thoughts? So I told the people in the APAC call that I would bring this up on the Tuesday call, in particular because we've got some representation from a few different cloud providers in this call. Well, at least Azure and Google. So what are people's thoughts on this? Or do you have examples of other parts of Kubernetes where this has happened? So I know, for example, that Kubernetes KK itself used to have the cloud providers project, and there was a big process to get that pulled out of the main repo. But all the cloud provider specific bits were already maintained by the cloud providers. There's also stuff like, for example, Core DNS has some cloud provider specific features that are maintained by the community in general.
I feel like I need to cross-reference this with the GKE auth plugin.
All right, Arthur.
I don't know if it's useful info or not, but in Cilium, we also kind of have that, like we have IPAM for multiple cloud provider, and some of those are in tree, and some of those are not even maintained by cloud provider. I know that, for instance, Datadog contributes a lot to some of those. But I think we have testing infra. Well, we have testing infra, I'm sure of it. And it's probably donated by cloud provider or something like that, but I'm not really aware of the details. but it's complicated for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And John mentions in the chat that external DNS has a ton of providers in tree. Yeah. And so going back to the core DNS example on who maintains stuff, I actually did the port of the AWS specific part to SDK v2 because it was messing up the dependency tree for something else. So but essentially the what I'm concerned about is if well there are a few things that I have in mind. One is that if we don't want to host cloud provider specific plugins, the risk is then that there'll be a sort of fragmented community, maybe with multiple plugin implementations, and people won't know which one to use. But if we do host cloud provider specific plugins in tree, even if they're initially contributed by the cloud providers themselves, the maintenance burden falls on the SIG. So that's where I think the idea of a conformance test is useful, because we can also say that we do want to host these in tree because it makes life easier for all the consumers. But we only keep things in tree if they pass their conformance tests, and if we don't want it to slow down API development. So if there are breaking changes in the API and the plugins don't keep up, then that's their problem, and we need to have well-defined criteria ahead of time for kicking plugins out.
Yeah, I feel like these should be separate. And I think I feel that these should be hosted separately by their like maintainer or their cloud or whatever. And then we could compile them in with our plugin, with our like binary if we wanted to, if they meet conformance or if we think it's convenient or whatever, like then, or maybe even that's too far. I don't know, but
Yeah, because it still creates the same problems, right? If we're
right.
trying to ship a binary that
Yeah,
pulls in external code, then if they don't
sure.
keep up, we've still got the same problems.
Yeah.
But I guess in both cases, the first step is having some kind of conformance test. So it goes back to the general MCS discussion we're having as well, around the conformance process and labeling implementations as getting the rubber stamp of approval or not.
Yeah, and for this case, I feel like there's probably a lot of like boilerplate we could provide too if we're going to make people host it elsewhere. But then again, that's another just whole thing, I guess. But just thinking out loud.
Yeah. And then again, maybe it's a lot of bother over not that much, because if you look at the AWS plugin,
Right.
it's
Yeah, I'm looking at it
400
right
lines
now.
of code. So
Yeah.
including the global mod and GoSum. So it's not actually all that much. So
Right.
Because like technically you could, I mean, if something is broken and you have integration tests and like no current maintainers of people aware of this code shows up, you could just deprecate it and like remove it
exactly.
at some point, something like that. Mark the
Yeah.
integration test optional, all of that sweet things. Well, not so sweet.
Exactly. But then the hard part of that is knowing that it's broken, because that would involve having some kind of integration tests that actually uses the cloud provider's infrastructure to test stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess do we think it's worse for it to be like harder for people to integrate with their clouds to adopt the cluster inventory API? Or do we think it's more important that when they try to do it, their thing isn't broken? I guess. That's hard.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Where's the balance? Because I do
Yeah.
think our goal should be to encourage use of the cluster provider,
Right.
cluster
Yeah.
inventory API wherever possible. So, but without taking on too huge a burden. So maybe we need to come up with, maybe we can say, I don't know. Really, we need to talk to the cloud providers to see, or maybe there's something in Cube already that we could hitch onto to get automated testing on cloud providers.
Yeah. I might Slack like cluster API or something. They have to have a problem. So yeah.
Yep.
Tough.
That sounds. Yeah. Ping Contribex maybe as well. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think that's probably the first step before we decide anything, is figuring out what our testing options would be like and what other people do in this space.
Yeah, I think that would be great, for sure.
Okie doke. And on that note, we've run out of time pretty much. So the other topic in flight is the annual report, but that's the PR's been opened. Thanks, Laura. I think that's in pretty good shape. So
yeah, feel free to take another look, but it is now available for our steering committee liaison to comment on as well. So that's the latest.
Yeah. And that's where we wanted to be. So thanks everybody for participating again. And I hope you have a great rest of the day and week, and I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.